May 5, 1945, Okinawa, Japan, the most brutal battlefield of the entire Pacific War. A cliff face called Hacksaw Ridge. 300 feet straight up, and at the top the worst fighting American soldiers had seen in the entire war. Men are falling everywhere. Every other soldier is retreating back down the cliff. Orders have come to pull back. The position is lost. Leave the wounded and go. One man doesn't go. He has no rifle. No weapon of any kind. Just a medical kit and a rope. For the next 12 hours alone on that ridge in the dark, surrounded by Japanese forces, he crawls from man to man, drags them to the cliff edge. Lowers them down one by one on a rope he ties himself. 75 men. One at a time. Every time he picks up another wounded soldier, he says the same prayer under his breath. Lord, please help me get one more. His name was Desmond Doss. And he never once fired a single shot in the entire war. To understand how a man with no weapon saved 75 lives on the most dangerous battlefield of the Pacific War, you first have to understand who Desmond Doss was and what he believed. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia. He grew up in a deeply religious Seventh-day Adventist family. His faith was not background noise in his life. It was the foundation of everything he was. From childhood he had two convictions that never wavered. He believed in serving his country. And he believed that taking a human life under any circumstances was wrong. Most people assumed these two beliefs were incompatible. Desmond Doss disagreed. When America entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, Doss volunteered immediately. He wanted to serve. He wanted to do his part, but he requested to serve as a combat medic. A role where he could save lives rather than take them. He would carry a medical kit into the most dangerous places on Earth. But he would never carry a gun. From the moment Desmond Doss arrived at basic training, his fellow soldiers made his life hell. When the other men picked up their rifles, Doss refused. He would train in every other way. He would push himself harder than anyone. But he would not touch a weapon designed to kill another human being. His unit could not understand it. They mocked him. They threw boots at him while he slept. They did everything they could to break him or drive him out. His commanding officers tried a different approach. They tried to have him discharged. Section 8, mentally unfit for service. No rational man would go into combat without a weapon. Therefore, Doss must be irrational. They tried to court-martial him for refusing a direct order to handle a weapon. His sergeant told him directly, "You are going to get yourself and everyone around you killed." Doss listened to every criticism, every insult, every threat, and then he went back to his Bible and his prayers and he stayed. The discharge attempts failed, the court-martial attempt failed. Doss had broken no law. He had a legal right as a conscientious objector to serve without carrying a weapon. He shipped out with the 77th Infantry Division. His unit went to Guam. Then to the Philippines. Doss proved himself in both campaigns. In firefight after firefight he ran toward the wounded while everyone else ran for cover. He dragged injured men out of the line of fire. He treated wounds under conditions that would have broken most trained combat soldiers. Slowly, something began to change in his unit. The men who had thrown boots at him started to notice that wherever the fighting was worse, Desmond Doss was there, unarmed, exposed, saving lives. They started to ask for him by name when they were hit. They started to feel something they had not expected to feel about the man they had called a coward. They started to feel safer when Doss was nearby. But nothing in Guam or the Philippines had prepared any of them for what was coming next. Okinawa. Okinawa in April 1945 was unlike anything American forces had faced in the entire Pacific War. The Japanese defenders had constructed an extraordinary network of tunnels, caves, and fortified positions throughout the island. They were prepared to fight to the absolute last man. Every yard of ground cost lives. At the center of the American advance was a feature called the Maida Escarpment. The soldiers called it Hacksaw Ridge. A plateau rising 300 feet above the jungle floor. The top was a killing ground of craters, bodies, and Japanese positions that seemed to absorb American attacks, and give nothing back. To get to the top you had to climb a cargo net strung up the cliff face, exposed, vulnerable, with Japanese fire raining down from above. The 77th Infantry Division went up that cliff on April 29, 1945. Doss climbed with them. No rifle, no sidearm, just his medical kit, his Bible in his pocket and a prayer on his lips. What happened at the top of that cliff over the next week would define him for the rest of his life. May 5, 1945, the assault on Hacksaw Ridge had been going for days. American forces had taken the plateau, lost it, taken it again. The casualties were devastating. Orders came to pull back down the cliff. The position was untenable. The men were to retreat and regroup. Every soldier headed for the cliff edge, except Desmond Doss. He heard the retreat order, he understood it, and he stayed. Because there were wounded men on that ridge who could not make it to the cliff on their own. And Desmond Doss was not going to leave them there. What he did over the next 12 hours alone on that ridge in the dark is almost impossible to fully comprehend. He crawled from man to man across a battlefield, still contested by Japanese forces. He had no weapon to defend himself. He treated wounds in darkness with Japanese soldiers moving around him. He dragged men who could not walk to the cliff edge, and then he tied a rope he fashioned himself to a stake driven into the rock, and he lowered each man down. One by one, 300 feet to safety below. Between every man he said the same prayer. Lord, please help me get one more. 75 times he said that prayer. 75 men went down that rope. When the soldiers at the bottom of the cliff realized what was happening, that their unarmed medic was still up there alone lowering wounded men down one at a time, they were stunned into silence. The men who had thrown boots at Desmond Doss, who had called him a coward, who had tried to get him discharged from the army, they were the ones he was saving. When Doss finally came down that cliff himself, his commanding officer could barely speak. The count of men rescued that night varies in different accounts. Doss himself always said he thought it was around 50 military records, and eyewitness accounts put the number at 75 men. Alone, unarmed, in the dark, surrounded by the enemy, but Doss was not finished. In the days that followed he continued to serve on Hacksaw Ridge. He was wounded multiple times. He treated his own wounds, so that other medics would not have to expose themselves to help him. He was hit by a grenade, and spent hours waiting for help rather than calling attention to his position and endangering others. When he was finally evacuated from Okinawa, he gave his Bible to a fellow soldier to hold. He never got it back. On October 12, 1945, President Harry S. Truman presented Desmond Doss with the Congressional Medal of Honor. The highest military honor the United States can bestow. Given to a man who never fired a single shot. When Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Doss's neck, he said something that has been quoted ever since. He said, "I am more honored to meet you than you are to meet me." Doss stood at attention. He accepted the medal with the same quiet dignity he had brought to everything. But there is something about that moment that most people don't know. Doss almost missed his own Medal of Honor ceremony. He had been evacuated from Okinawa with serious injuries, including a shattered arm from a sniper's bullet. He was still recovering in hospital when the ceremony was scheduled. He got himself out of that hospital bed. He put on his uniform. He stood before the President of the United States. And he received a medal he had never sought for doing something he had never considered heroic. He was just doing his job. Desmond Doss came home from the war with the Medal of Honor and lungs full of tuberculosis contracted on Okinawa. He spent 5 years in and out of hospital. He lost a lung. He lost a hearing in one ear from a grenade blast on the ridge. The war had taken things from him that no medal could replace, but it had not taken his faith, and it had not taken his essential character. He went back to his small town in Virginia. He married. He had a son. He farmed. He lived quietly in the same community where he had grown up. He never sought the spotlight. He gave interviews when asked. He spoke at schools and churches when invited. He told his story not to glorify himself, but because he believed it demonstrated something he wanted people to understand. That one person acting on their deepest convictions can make a difference that nobody who knew them would have predicted. The men who threw boots at him in basic training. He had saved their lives. Here is the power play and twisted truth at the heart of this story. The United States Army tried to remove Desmond Doss before he ever reached the battlefield. They called him mentally unfit. They tried to court-martial him. His own unit tried to break him through months of sustained bullying and intimidation. The system decided that a man without a weapon was useless in combat. The twisted truth is this: the most decorated soldier in his unit, the man who saved more of his fellow soldiers than anyone else in his division, the man that President Truman said he was more honored to meet than any other, was the man the system tried to throw away. Doss never argued with his critics, never fought back against his bullies, never demanded recognition. He just kept showing up, unarmed, unbreakable. And when the moment came that defined everything, he was ready. Because he had always been ready. His weapon was never a rifle. His weapon was the absolute unshakable belief that every human life was worth saving, and that belief saved 75 of them on one night on a ridge in Okinawa. Desmond Doss died on March 23, 2006. He was 87 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. The man the Army tried to discharge. Buried with full military honors. A film was made about his life in 2016 called Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson. It introduced his story to a new generation and earned 6 Academy Award nominations. But the real story is always better than the movie. Because the real story includes the boots thrown at him in the night. The court-martial attempts. The months of being called a coward by the men whose lives he would one day save. History's Wildside is about power plays and twisted truths. And here is the final thing to take away from Desmond Doss. In a war fought with the most destructive weapons in human history, the most powerful thing on Hacksaw Ridge was a man with no weapon at all. Just a rope, a prayer, and an absolute conviction that one more life was worth saving. Lord, please help me get one more. 75 times. Subscribe to History's Wildside for a new story every Sunday. Power plays, twisted truths, and the ordinary people who did extraordinary things. This has been History's Wildside. I will see you next Sunday.